Like that? You got there the home line?
Yeah, we got them all.
You gonna have a seat? You gonna have a seat?
Yeah, just.
Okay, I think we're ready to get started here. I wish I could promise you all an exciting beginning to this afternoon as we had to this morning with our surprise guest visitor. But looking around, I don't see any surprise guest visitors, but we have good representation from Finance and LAO to get us started. And we're very excited about that, of having you both. So what we have in front of us, we have a LAO handout on child care and on Prop 98. I think we're going to focus mostly on sergeants are passing these out at the moment. Really focus on the 98. The child care aspects is part of the bigger package, is going to end up conforming in many ways, and we're working on that. So rather than spend the time on that now, what I thought we'd do is start out with an overview of Prop 98. And obviously, we'll touch on child care issues in as much as they're inextricably linked with 98, but we won't go through the child care handout. So with that beginning, we're going to go through the LAO handout, but I always start with Finance, so if you want to start with some comments about 98 before we move into the handout.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, the Proposition 98 choices in front of you are a little bit more focused than in past years, where there were a lot of revenue aspects of various budget plans rolling around. So both houses have kept within the basic framework that the governor's budget laid out. As you're all well aware, the administration's priority was protecting K-12 education, given the previous declines in spending that we've talked about. And as you referenced, we're continuing to work on the child care package. That's the biggest moving part within Proposition 98, but we look forward to working through that with you and your staff.
LAO.
Jennifer Kuhn, Ledge Analyst Office. So the handout before you, there are not many Prop 98 issues in conference, but we still thought this quick overview might provide some basic context. So turning to page 1 and diving right in, this table shows the total Proposition 98 spending levels under the Governor, Assembly, and Senate plans. As you can see in the table, all three plans are spending at $49.3 billion. Between the Assembly and the Senate, there are very slight differences in how they distribute those resources. So the Senate is spending $9 million more in K-12 education and $9 million less in child care. A much more notable difference between the plans has to do with their reliance on one-time funds. So the bottom part of this table shows you that aspect, with the governor relying on only $11 million in one-time monies, the Assembly relying on $217 million, and the Senate $123 million. We don't show any current year actions because all three plans are funded at the same level in the current year, which is $49.7 billion. There's no spending differences between them, and it's the same level, obviously, as proposed by the governor and as appropriated in the 10-11 Budget Act. So there just is nothing noteworthy. So turning to page 2, this focuses then on the guarantee, apart from just the spending levels, but where the plans are relative to the guarantee. The governor is obviously assuming passage of his tax package, and then he funds right at the minimum guarantee, making that assumption. The Assembly has 3 revenue proposals, again, very modest proposals. They generate just $40 million in additional general fund revenue, and that would increase the minimum guarantee by $16 million. The Senate has 4, again, small revenue proposals that would generate $275 million in additional general fund monies, increasing the guarantee by $113 million. So as you can see from these numbers, in 11-12, given all of the underlying dynamics of Prop 98, about 40 cents of every additional general fund dollar is going to Prop 98. So if you were to, again, assume the governor's tax package and the Assembly's 3 packages, the Assembly package would be just slightly below the guarantee, $16 million, and the Senate, assuming their tax package and the governor's tax package, would be $113 million below. The next page shows all of the major Prop 98 differences between the three plans. It's intended just as a reference page. If you look at the bottom of the table, you can see that all three plans cut $3.2 billion in Prop 98 spending. And in addition to the funding issues, there are two major Prop 98 language issues in conference. Both are itemized separately in your agenda, so I'm just going to mention them very briefly, assuming you'll have a more detailed conversation later. One of the language issues has to do with the inter-year deferral. Both houses have adopted modified placeholder trailer bill language with an intent to shorten the deferral period. And so as you can see from the table, all three plans have a $2.1 billion K-12 deferral. The open issue before you is in what months to delay payment and in what months to make payments. That's really the decision before you. The second language issue has to do with K-3 class size reduction. The Assembly plan contains language to make the program a continuous appropriation. So this essentially takes the program off books, and the state would just fund whatever is needed for the program and make adjustments on a periodic basis throughout the fiscal year. Page 4 then focuses just on the major Prop 98 fiscal conference issues before you. There are, again, are few major issues that are for your consideration. One of the most significant differences, as you already have indicated, is in your child care packages. So the governor makes $716 million in ongoing child care cuts. The Assembly plan has $272 million in ongoing cuts, and the Senate $525 million, and again in ongoing child care cuts. As indicated on that first page of the handout, all three plans fund at the same total Prop 98 level, $49.3 billion. So they're getting less savings here, and they're dealing with that shortfall relative to the governor in four primary ways. Both houses rely more heavily on one-time money, so that's a big strategy used by both houses. The Senate plan raises some additional revenue and then uses that revenue for child care so that they don't have to make a like amount of cut. The Senate also turns around and cuts K-12 education more so that, again, they don't have to cut as much in child care. And the Assembly defers some child care payments. Again, so it will look like a cut on paper in 11-12, but then the payment will just come late in 12-13. So while the four actions do address the shortfall on paper between the Assembly and Senate child care packages and the governor's child care solution, there's two issues that have been raised since the plans were put in place. One is that both plans rely on one-time money, a portion of one-time money that has not yet been identified. So they essentially have these shortfalls. The Assembly has about $134 million shortfall and the Senate a $40 million shortfall. And then also, since the plans have been put in place, one of the Senate's revenue estimates has just been updated. So a few days ago, it was thought that the child care tax refund, by eliminating it, would give the state about $100 million, and the updated estimate is about $70 million. So the difference between these is just another $30 million shortfall. The other major issue is relating to mandates. The houses take very different approaches on education mandates, with the Assembly deferring the cost and the Senate intending to fund the full cost. So on page 5, we show how we would recommend reconciling the differences between the houses and then also addressing these shortfalls that have been identified over the last few days. So as you see toward the bottom half of this table, there's a line for child care. And you can see that our recommended package cuts less than the two houses. Now, having said that, it does achieve, although it's hard to decipher from this table, it does achieve somewhere in the middle on ongoing cuts. So we looked at the Assembly and the Senate level of ongoing child care cuts, and don't get you quite in the middle, but we get you close. And then we use only the one-time funds that have been identified to date. And then we also assume that there's no across-the-board reduction in our plan. And the reason that we don't have an across-the-board child care reduction is we think it undermines your other specific child care policy decisions. And so we can talk about that in much more detail. But we didn't want the two actions to be conflicting with each other. So if you look at the table again, we're cutting less in childcare. So under our recommended package, both houses have also indicated an intent to get to the governor's level of $3.2 billion in reduction, so we need to find additional solution. We wanted to make it ongoing solutions so that you wouldn't have a problem reemerge next year. So we cut more in K-12 education. The big piece that's noteworthy is that as part of this LAO package, $200 million would be associated with a reduction in state categorical funding for basic aid districts. So if a basic aid district had excess local money that could be used in place of the state money, the state would just no longer provide that additional dollar. We assume that the state meets its constitutional obligation. It has an obligation to provide districts $120 in state funding per pupil. We assume that it meets that obligation. But again, this is ongoing savings. We actually think it's reasonable policy in any environment and that it's achievable. So when you compare that against some of the child care options that are one-time in nature, might not be achievable and might be questionable policy. Again, we think this is a very reasonable alternative. And finally, on the mandate issue, we make a few recommended modifications to the Senate package, largely because we want to address that shortfall. So in summary, cutting a little bit less from childcare, a little bit more from K-12, and dealing with all identified shortfalls that you have before you right now. That's what this alternative attempts to do. So the mandate issue is a relatively big difference, again, between the houses, and it's not itemized separately in your agenda. So the last page deals just with the mandate issue. I think we can cover it in just a couple of minutes. Again, the Assembly defers payment, and the Senate intends to cover the full cost. So a recent court ruling suggests that the Assembly plan might not be workable. And this is because the court said if the state defers or provides no funding or only nominal funding, then districts can come to court and seek relief from undertaking the mandated activity. So if the state were not to provide any funding, it serves as a sort of de facto suspension. And the education field has shown a willingness to litigate. So there is some probability that districts would seek relief from undertaking those activities. The court has also ruled that just the general practice of deferral isn't acceptable. So this has gone to an appellate court. The state did lose. The administration says it has no intent to appeal to the Supreme Court. So the Senate plan deals with all of these issues. It funds the cost of mandates. Its only problem is relatively technical. It doesn't provide quite enough. So when we estimate the cost, it's about $100 million, not $80 million, so there's this $20 million shortfall. So rather than providing more resources, because things are quite tight, we suggest going with the Senate number and just identifying some mandates that you could suspend to reduce the projected cost from $100 to $80 million. And we've identified 6, 7, 8 mandates that you could consider that would yield you $20 million in savings. So again, our attempt here was to give you something that was legal, that was workable, and that still gave you some savings. So that's an overview of the major Prop 98 issues. I know we covered child care at a very high level, but presumably that was sort of the right place to start, and then we can go in more detail if you'd like.
Question, Ms. Harkey.
Thank you. Could you define the term excess tax?
So as many of you know, districts essentially get a certain amount of money that can be used for general purposes per pupil. It's called this revenue limit rate. And some districts have enough local property tax money to meet this revenue limit rate. But some districts actually have enough where they not only meet that rate, but they have well in excess of it. And that excess above the revenue limit rate is called, for colloquially, there might be a better term for it, but it's excess of the revenue limit. So
it's local taxes that they are allowed to keep, and if they choose, that right now they probably choose to fund their schools with it, which is what we're trying to do here at the state level, is fund schools. But if it's local, it's considered excess because it's over the revenue limit. And so then we're going to take that and fund somebody else's district?
No. So under this option that we have for your consideration, districts get to keep every local property tax dollar they have now. We don't take it from them. We don't redistribute it. It's just if they do have a local dollar that theoretically could be used to fund one of these state categorical programs. So we might be giving them $1 for instructional and professional development today. But if they did have one of these excess local property tax dollars, we just wouldn't give them the state dollar.
I understand. So they still have the categorical requirement, but they would not get the money that they get now. I just have an interesting chart here, and I'm just asking because I've been trying to figure out education funding for a while, but I go off on a lot of different issues, and this is just one black box to me. I'll share this with my with the rest of the members up here. But I see all sorts of revenue funding, some from local, but this is probably, I believe, the revenue limit line over here, and you can see that everybody's pretty much in line. But like, let's say Irvine gets absolutely nothing prior to their tax. William S. Hart gets quite a bit prior to their tax. Capistrano Unified, which is in my district, gets $594 versus William S. Hart getting 3,000 something, and it's like, or 5,000. It's very confusing to me as to who's paying for what and how we can. I believe this goes back to a Serrano decision and a 1979 allocation. But I think we really need to look at education funding overall. And so before I would take anybody's redistribute and decide they've got excess tax. If you're not giving them their categorical funding, you are in essence taking taxes out or taking money, local taxes out of their school. And so I will be glad to share this. I thought that's where you were going, but I just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
So just 2 points of clarification. Much of the, quote, categorical money that the state has on the books right now is essentially general purpose. So there would be few categorical dollars where a district would be left not getting a state dollar and needing to fulfill a state requirement. And just the second comment is the state has done variations of this option in the past, so this isn't a completely new idea.
Thank you. I know. I don't think there's any new ideas anymore. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around this option as well, the categorical funding. But
Maybe they can explain it.
maybe you've got this. Is that what this is?
No, this isn't
No.
Part B's information.
Maybe just could you go through that
200 million.
how you got to that number, the 200 million figure again?
Sure. Edgar Cabral with the LAO. I can talk a little bit about how we developed that estimate. What we were trying to look at is saying when the state, as my colleague Jennifer has mentioned, we have revenue limit funding that every district is entitled to a certain amount of per pupil funding. There are some school districts who receive, just through property taxes, more than that per pupil funding amount. So, for example, they're supposed to get $6,000 per pupil, and they're getting like $7,000, $8,000 because they're a high property tax school district. Those districts, when the state has made reductions in the past, the state cannot take away property tax dollars. The state can only make reductions to general fund dollars. So those districts have not bear all of the reductions that the state has made over the past few years. So what our proposal does is say, okay, these school districts have not taken reductions as a result of revenue limit cuts over the past few years. So what we're going to say is, school district, you have some excess tax, and you've been able to you've been cut less because of this excess tax that you have. So what we're going to do at the state level is say, before we give you any categorical dollars, you have to use your excess tax dollars first. And the state then gets some savings as a result of that. We looked at how much funding, we looked at data at how much excess tax was available, and we tried to make estimates of how much we could capture under this proposal, and our estimate at this point is $200 million statewide. It means if you're a basic aid school district, if you have excess taxes, you would receive a little bit less categorical funding because of the fact that you have this additional funding more than what your revenue limit actually is.
You say a little bit less. Is it? I mean, you have to basically buy down to basic aid number.
Yeah, the amount would depend. It depends on how much in excess they have, and also depends on how much categorical funding they have. So obviously, there might be a school district with a lot of excess taxes, but very few categorical programs that they receive, and so we couldn't go in and capture all of their excess tax. We would just reduce some of their categorical funding, and just they would then use their excess taxes to fund that program. The idea is that these are districts who, because of the revenue limit reductions that have been made, have not necessarily taken cuts as deep as as other school districts, and this is a way for the state to make reductions to those programs, to those districts through another mechanism, through the categorical program.
And basically gives you more money in the categorical account to redistribute basically to the other schools that are not above that limit. Right?
Or just direct general fund savings that you could use anywhere within Prop 98. So there are quite a few dimensions to the issue, and so just another way to think about it, which again is just because it is not a new idea, but it wasn't in the governor's plan, so you haven't been talking about it for the last 2 months. These basic aid districts, in some cases, get well more than their revenue limit rate. Some are getting almost double their revenue limit rate. So whereas on average other districts are getting something like $6,000, they're getting something like $12,000. And the state lives with that. They say these districts can have lots of funding per pupil. That's their local revenue. They're high wealth districts, and the state just lives with it. Now, there are some of these basic aid districts that aren't that well off. They only get $7,000 or $7,500. But still, on average, on a regular year, they're doing better than the average district who has to rely on some state dollars because they don't have enough local dollars to get to their revenue limit rate. So all we're saying is that these districts, if they do get, say, $500 per pupil from the state, so even though they get $7,500 in local property taxes, we still give them $500. So now they're at $8,000, the other districts at $6,500. And what we're just saying is if you do have the local dollar, then we're going to sort of count it toward the state expense and not give you the other state dollar, because in essence what the state has been doing is just exacerbating differences in per pupil funding across the state. And so this is one way both to deal with these districts. They don't rely on state dollars, so when the state hits a recession, they're largely immune. Now they're heavily reliant on local property taxes, and the housing shortfall has been affecting them. But they're still getting typically well more than, quote, that average district. And so this is one way to try to give you, again, a reasonable policy, trying to think about how kids will be affected across the state and give you an option with these kids would be hurt less than other kids, other child care services, the other options before you.
And what does the Department of Finance think of this option?
We haven't talked through the specifics of this, but obviously we've avoided having to even have that conversation by putting forward our child care package. So I think that's where we'd try to focus the attention back, get to the $716 million in our child care package in whatever way it works, and then you don't have to have this discussion.
Ms. Harkey.
Thank you. Yeah, I would just like to point out to the other members up here that on page 2 of my handout, we show that a typical unified school district gets over $12,000. This is comparative revenue. This is average. Typical school district gets over $12,000. And the one that predominates mine only gets it gets under $9,000 or something per student. We have the charter schools operate on about $7,000. We have basic aid districts that do operate up over $14,000, and districts with necessary small schools up again over $14,000. So this is all very complex, and I think what we're trying to do here is find another $200,000 that we can somehow put to child care. So I think that's really the decision. Do we want to decrease Prop 98 funding K through 12 to put something towards child care, $200,000? I think that's really what we're talking about here, isn't that? $200 million, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Any comments? I mean, I think that's accurate. But, any other questions or comments from members on this issue? Or on any of the 98 issues? I should open that up. Otherwise, we'll move to the. I know this is still a moving target in terms of trying to get to a solution. There's a lot of conversations. Ms. Skinner.
I just noted with some irony that the discussion we had this morning about that gas consumption surcharge fund transfer, that if we approved it as proposed by Senate, that it increases the Prop 98 minimum guarantee.
Yeah, no, I'm looking at something different. But, okay. Any comments on that? No?
I don't, it's in the LAO's proposal, it says it has, that you described some problems with the Assembly's approach, which is fine. We heard that explanation, but, and obviously your alternative, I can't tell whether your alternative was counting on that money from the gas surcharge or not. I'm assuming not because of its effect on the Prop 98 guarantee.
No, we didn't build that funding into our package. Our package ties to the same spending level that both houses and the governor have, which is at 49.3, and that does avoid the increase associated with that gas consumption surcharge.
So what would be, I see this amount on the page, but in fact, what would that do to, let's say we adopted the Senate's approach both on Prop 98 and on that gas surcharge, that would then change the amount that's scored in the Senate's general fund reserve, correct?
Well, yes. So in all of these cases, whether it's the 3 Assembly or the 4 Senate, they're raising revenue, and about 40 cents on the dollar is essentially going to Prop 98 because the guarantee is increasing, or it's creating an obligation that needs to be met in Prop 98. So with this one alone, about 40% of that, or 40-some million, is increasing the guarantee. The issue before you is you just raised some revenue, so you're still better off, and some in terms of money available to do things. It's just you can suspend 98. So if you really don't want the 40 million, you could get the full benefit of the 162. Regardless, even if 40 went to education, you're still up 120 to the good. So it's just a calculation of how do you want to use this new revenue? Do you want to not raise it just because it increases the guarantee slightly? So just various considerations for you.
Right. But anything that increases the obligation either increases the amount of deferral, or if we pay it directly, decreases the amount we'd have available in terms of reserve.
And ultimately, if you didn't want to suspend, when you come back in June or July, you would want to true up now. So it does create a cost pressure for you.
Okay. Well, what we do here is inextricably linked with child care, and I know there's moving parts. So unless there's an additional question on the 98, I'd like to move on to the next category, but I don't want to cut off discussion if someone had a particular question. Same thing with the Prop 10. I think we'll skip over that for the moment and move to in-home supportive services. Take a second for everyone to readjust. And if we could start with finance on IHSS.
Sure. This is an area where both the Assembly and the Senate were trying to get to the same place in terms of dollar savings as the governor's budget. So we appreciate that, and we want to work with you to continue to meet that target. In terms of, we just, as an administration, want to make sure this is an area where my comments from yesterday regarding kind of realistic and achievable numbers comes into play. That, for instance, the caseload adjustment that was adopted by both houses. While there are some caseload savings, there's already another number in the budget, $130 million, that was put in previously as an effort to sort of capture caseload savings. So, we're interested in avoiding double counts of savings, but we've been working with your staff and the various interest groups and trying to come up with some new ideas here in order to generate savings. For instance, the Community First option. That is something that's going to be happening under federal law, and we just need to continue to work in trying to figure out what an appropriate number is.
Okay. Elio?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Jenny Bello with the Analyst's Office. I think the agenda does a nice job of laying out where both houses were in agreement in terms of how their approach to the in-home supportive services budget. I think the issue really that's in conference and that's in front of you is that the Senate adopted a reduction to domestic and related care services for in-home supportive services recipients. That was more targeted than the governor's proposal, but they did adopt a reduction there. Whereas the Assembly, rather than take that reduction to make up the difference, they assumed an equivalent amount of savings pursuant to a combination of proposals that are yet to be specifically determined, but are related to nursing home diversion, and also nursing home avoidance. So those savings would actually be captured in the Department of Healthcare Services budget as they're more Medicaid issues. But that's the real difference in front of you today. And we would recommend the Senate version in thinking about those two.
Okay. On the DNR service reduction, when the assessment is made within home supportive services, don't they already reduce what they can get based on who's living in the room and who they live with and those kinds of things? So is this not a double cut in some ways?
I think there is already some allowance for that currently, but this would, I think, make it more formalized so that this was something that the social worker was able to look at that time and actually have specific rules and guidance to think about that. So it does formalize it.
So you're not saying it reads to me like it's a doubling of the cut. They're basically cut once when they're assessed, and then this would be a cut on top of that.
Nick Buchan, Department of Finance. So what you're referring to is social workers prorate the hours based on the availability of another person living in the household that can accomplish the same task. That proration and non-proration went into the development of the savings that was in the governor's budget proposal. And so when we costed out what the Senate had adopted, that also got factored in to that savings estimate. So I think, as Ms. Bell mentioned, it's considered, but it's more on a social worker to social worker basis. So this would make it a statewide policy.
Mr. Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to ask a little bit about this community first choice option. Since the Senate Budget Committee hearing, I think it was last Friday, on this issue, I think Secretary Sebelius has actually issued some proposed regulations and put a little bit of meat on these bones. And I wanted you to talk to us about that. And then also, is it possible that, given, I think, the way the Secretary is speaking about these federal dollars, that it could be used both for home and for community? Might there potentially, and I'm not necessarily suggesting it could happen at this time, but for us in the future, as these dollars get more formalized and begin to roll out, that maybe there would be some community first choice possibilities to support some of the services that are currently being supported at adult day health care?
Sure. Let me answer the first part, and I'll have Nick take the second part. So the draft guidelines have come out this week, and
guidelines is the word I was looking for. Yes.
Yeah, and so we are taking a look at those, trying to get before they came out, it was really a shot in the dark in terms of the savings that's achievable, but the department and the Department of Finance are working as fast as we can to sort of digest those and get back to you with a firm number that we think is kind of the right estimate, that if those guidelines hold through the comment period.
For our purposes, the timing is fortuitous.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we'd sort of be planning on beginning of next week having that number.
Good. And the draft guidelines also look promising.
I mean, they certainly, yes, that we, before the draft guidelines, we weren't suggesting scoring anything
That's
here.
what we heard from you last Friday.
And now you're hearing from us that we think it's getting closer to achievable savings, and we just need to nail down what assumptions we make in building a reasonable estimate.
Good. I'm sure we will all encourage your nailing down process, and I'm going to take this as good news.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then let me have Nick take the second part.
Sure. So along those lines, the departments are also considering if additional savings outside of IHSS could be scored. For example, the adult day health care, MSSP, and aging. So there are other areas where we're considering, and we're not sure yet if the savings are viable. So. And
is my memory correct in remembering a $3.7 billion pool of money that came out in these guidelines?
That number's not sticking in my mind, but
okay.
I've got a lot of numbers up there. So
yeah, I know. Okay.
3.7 for California. That's
no. We'll leave it at that. Thank you,
Ms. Harkey.
As I understand it, and as I understood the Senator Leno, these are draft guidelines, so it's not really approved yet. Should we be scoring $121 million if we don't know yet?
I think I would say today, no, 121 million is not the right number, but by the beginning of next week, we'll have a number that we'll be comfortable with. I think underlying your question is, well, these are draft, they can change, and I think there's a lot of assumptions in the budget that rely on the administration's best estimate at the time we put the budget together, and this would fall into that. Certainly, things can move, things will move, and that's why we have a May revision every year to sort of take a second crack at refining any numbers, but based on the information we have, we'll get you the best number we can on at the beginning of the week.
Okay. Mr. Huff.
Are we voting on this item, or are we just gathering information now?
Right now, we're gathering information. Yeah.
So we won't be voting on it today?
We're not going to vote on this today.
Okay, very good. I will just say that I'm still concerned about the loosey-goosey way this is put together and the lack of definition. Maybe that comes together. There's certainly been a little bit of resolution on the community first choice. But we continue to support the governor's approach as opposed to this.
Okay, caseload double.
Okay, any other questions on this? I mean, we know we need to get 130. You know, we sort of have agreement on the 360 of the actions taken by both houses. We know we need to get the other 130. There's different ways to go about doing it. We're working feverishly to kind of come to a compromise on that. We've had some discussion on it, but I think we can move on now to the next issue, which is long-term care programs. So again, if we could start out with the Department of Finance.
Sure. The two programs in front of you, the Multipurpose Senior Services Program and Adult Day Health Care, the administration is proposing to eliminate both of them for a savings of nearly $200 million. Again, this kind of falls into the category of that we need to make the tough choices, and in taking these reductions, the administration has really focused its efforts on IHSS, the program we just talked about, as the state's core long-term health program, and you know we're forced to make reductions of things outside of that core, and even into the core throughout the budget, and these fall into those.
Leo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, the Senate adopted a $5 million general fund reduction to the MSSP program and also adopted budget bill language directing the department to begin negotiations with the federal government to try to reduce some of the operational costs associated with running the MSSP waiver. The Assembly kept all funding there for the MSSP program. We're recommending the Senate version on that.
Okay, I want to start with a question of the, on the Assembly side, we're very concerned about the MSSP cut. We think it's going to cost us a lot in the long run, and that's why we chose not to eliminate it. As a question, given the high acuity rates of the folks that are in the program, what percentage of these folks do you think would end up in a nursing home if we lost the MSSP program? I guess I'll ask that to the LAO.
So you're asking about complete elimination of the MSSP program?
I'm saying for every, I assume that a reduction means less slots, less people.
I think it depends on how successful negotiations would be with the federal government to try to reduce some of the costs associated with running the MSSP program. If they are not able to reduce any of the costs of the MSSP waiver, you're correct that there would be less people served in the MSSP program. Whether or not those people would end up in a skilled nursing facility is very difficult to predict and has to do a lot with personal decisions and other factors that individual may be approaching.
Isn't with MSSP, I mean, aren't we talking about folks who are basically at the far end of the need column? I mean, by definition, in order to even be in that program, they have to not only be nursing home eligible, but basically have no other option?
They have to be they have to be certified as nursing home eligible and meet certain age and requirements, and also be Medicaid eligible. I'm not sure what other requirements you may be thinking of. It doesn't take into account sort of do they have another person at home or anything like that. It's really based on the individual.
Additional questions on the MSSP? Ms. Skinner.
I mean, that's, to me, the difficulty is if a person in this kind of program has to be nursing home eligible. So we already know, I mean, compared to, say, adult day health care where they don't have to be nursing home eligible, though we do know some are. But this particular program, it seems very hard to imagine that the elimination of slots doesn't increase the number of people in a nursing home. And so while I don't like to use the term gimmicks that has been thrown around in other parts of the budget debate, it seems like trying to score a savings in a program like this could really be considered a gimmick because, in fact, if it does result, and especially they're all Medicaid eligible, so they're then in a nursing home on our dime. And if I felt that there was a cut that we could make that I knew would reduce administrative overhead and not slots, I would be more comfortable. So for me, this isn't so much, I mean, most of the cuts we're discussing now have serious impact on people's lives. But now I'm discussing it from a very fiscal point of view, which is that the number of people that are in this program is not that large in the first place, and there already must be nursing home eligible. So the cut seems to me to guarantee an increase in nursing home beds that we then have to pay for.
And if I can just add, I mean, one of the reasons we proposed eliminating this program is that it's not providing the direct services. It's a case management program, so that by eliminating this program, we have more dollars available to provide those direct services.
It's maybe case management, but it's one of the most cost-effective programs that we have in terms of keeping people out of the nursing homes and ultimately saving us a tremendous amount of money. Not to mention it's a humane thing in terms of keeping people in their home environments, which is sort of where we're going, not just in terms of cost savings, but in terms of a better way of caring for folks. So I think I hear what you're saying, and I think we just have a very strong viewpoint about this program, and I don't know if there's anything else we can discuss on it, but I don't know if we're ready to to make any sort of compromise on it. Mr. Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Could LAO remind us of some of the steps we've taken in past years where we've tried to contain some of the costs, in particular in the adult day health care program, where we have been rebuffed and enjoined and told we cannot, out of concern, I think, to the Olmstead Act, or decision, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Leno. Members, Meredith Worden with the Legislative Analyst's Office. Over the past several years, there have been a number of actions to help contain costs in the adult day health care program. I would first highlight the moratorium that was put in place in 2004, which limits the development or expansion of new ADHD providers with some exceptions. In addition, in the more recent couple years, several reforms were put in place, including putting in treatment authorization reviews. In addition, there were efforts to try to tighten the eligibility criteria in 2009-10. These efforts were enjoined by the courts due to potential issues with the Americans with Disability Act. I would also note that in 2006, a number of reforms were enacted. Those also included eligibility changes, payment methodology changes, some of which are proceeding while others are still yet to be fully implemented.
I think we're all struggling, number one, because of the particular client population we're talking about. We're all sensitive to the serious assistant needs that our senior population have, especially for these Medi-Cal eligible and certainly the nursing home eligible in MSSP. And we've tried to contain costs. We've told we can't. Now the governor's proposing elimination, which is very difficult for all of us to consider. We're also trying to struggle, where do we find the $125 million difference between the two houses? Even if we were to go in one direction, we still have to pay for it. Thinking a little bit out loud here, tell me if we would bump into the same ADA concerns. Is there a way to clarify a difference between different populations currently in adult day health care? For example, could there be a population within adult day health care who would be nursing home eligible, qualified, but then there would also be others, and they would get a certain level of funding, but there would be others who aren't nursing home qualified and are there as much for some lesser medical assistance, and they're more for the social aspect or the community building aspect that gets people out of their homes and raises their spirits as well as their health. Is there a way to go in that kind of a direction?
I'm going to address your two questions. The last one first.
Any way you like.
I believe absent a waiver, I think it's very hard to target certain population groups. As the benefit is structured under a state plan option, it must be statewide, and it can't target individuals in the way that you're suggesting, such as a nursing home certifiable. I think a waiver would likely be required. I'm not entirely sure and would probably defer to Finance or the Department of Health Care Services for additional clarification. With regard to issues related to the Americans with Disabilities Act, I'm going to kind of address some of the issues in your agenda related to the actions both houses took. As you know, outlined in your agenda, the Senate took an action to effectively eliminate the benefit but maintain some funding, $25 million ongoing, to provide for social services that are not necessarily provided under the Medi-Cal program. There are other fee-for-services services available for these beneficiaries if the benefit were eliminated. We believe, as we have identified in prior hearings, that outright elimination of the program without some sort of transition plan and efforts to move these
beneficiaries to other services, it would likely run afoul of the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Senate action does address some of these issues. As such, we would recommend the Senate action. In contrast, the Assembly action preserves the benefit. It tries to identify some cost containment efforts for a much smaller reduction and general fund savings.
If I've heard you correctly, you think the governor's proposal would in fact be enjoined?
I think absent a transition plan, the governor's proposal is at risk for such ADA issues as we
Does
have
the
also
governor's
identified.
plan have a transition plan?
There is no transition
So, okay,
plan.
so in effect, you don't think it's legally sustainable?
We would question the sustainability of that action absent some effort to transition beneficiaries to other services.
Right.
So.
Okay, thank you.
That's one for the Assembly plan.
Well, either, both, except she did say she was more supportive of the Senate plan for the other reasons.
But if to avoid the legal liability, you're saying go with the Assembly plan.
I would note that we would recommend the Senate action and note that the Senate action included some funding to help transition beneficiaries to other social services, as well as trailer bill language to direct the Department of Health Care Services to help beneficiaries transition to other Medi-Cal services and also potentially these social services that might be available in the community.
Yeah, Mr. Lowenthal? Yes. Mr. Lowenthal. Yeah, Mr. Lennon, for a quick follow-up, and then we'll go back to Mr. Lowenthal, and then Ms. Skinner, and then Ms. Harkey.
Again, finance or LAO, whoever can help me with this. Again, just trying to think a little creatively, and I know we've all been trying to be creative about this for many, many years. Is there a way for some sort of partnership with either MSSP or adult day health care with federally qualified health clinics that would be able to allow some additional use of federal dollars to come in where the administration is suggesting we eliminate state dollars, so that there would be, again, I'm not sure if it would be some skeletal form of adult day health care or some sort of enhanced MSSP partnering with these FQHCs. Has this been thought of before and there's reasons we can't, or is there some kernel of possibility in this?
Unfortunately, John Wunderlich with the Department of Finance. Don't have a good direct answer to that. Certainly something we can look into. I would just note that there are several FQHCs that are currently ADHC providers, and the state pays for ADHC services there.
Currently?
That sounds approximately correct. And the state funds ADHC services at those facilities at the standard state matching rate. So there's no enhanced, federal funding or whatnot that's available through those services offered currently at the FQHCs.
And is there a duplication of services at those 14?
I'm sorry, I'm not
sure. So there are federal dollars that are being spent for the health care provision in those 14, plus we're also giving them the state dollars for those 14.
Right. When Medi-Cal beneficiaries receive services at these facilities, they're reimbursed through the Medi-Cal program at the traditional sharing rate. Well, right now, of course, there's the slight bump because of ARA, but they're reimbursed by the program, and there's a set payment system for FQHCs that the state is required to align with.
Okay. And then is there a reason why we wouldn't want more than 14 of these arrangements, or is there what are hurdles that?
Well, these arrangements aren't any more beneficial than a regular adult day health care center.
Okay.
So the state share for these services in FQHC are no less than at another center.
Okay.
And we've already heard from the LAO with regard to the current Senate position and the current Assembly position. Your take is?
Well, certainly the Senate version aligns much closer to the governor's proposal. Our take is that technically the Senate version does appear to be viable. So as we understand it, it would outright eliminate the benefit and then create the separate program to provide some block grant funding to assist in a transition plan. On the Assembly side, it seems to us that it's similar to efforts that have been enjoined in the past. So we're unclear as to exactly how the savings would materialize. In terms of the legality of the governor's plan, the argument that we've made is in the past when we have outright eliminated optional benefits, we've generally been successful against court challenges. We would certainly concede that this is, not the exact same as say, a dental elimination as it relates to Olmstead, but we have been successful in outright eliminations in the past, whereas attempts to tailor benefits have commonly been enjoined.
So without the transition plan to which the LAO has referenced for purposes of legal sustainability, without that, you do believe your plan is legally sustainable?
Yes.
So you disagree with the LAO on that?
Yeah, I don't think the LAO has outright said that we would lose a legal challenge. They have just said that there are some questions in that area.
I think they were pretty clear without some sort of transition plan. You thought with a transition plan, there's a fighting chance. Without a transition plan, there's not much of a chance.
We believe there is a legal risk without a transition plan. That risk is somewhat mitigated with the transition plan.
All right. Thank you.
And of course, the way I heard that is that the Assembly version makes more sense. Mr. Lowenthal.
That may be true. We're not trying to make sense at this moment. We're trying to keep people alive. Right. What I don't understand is we're talking about in the ADHC program, and the issue is just how much can we eliminate or cut, and really what are the legal issues with. It's my understanding that we may be the only state or one of the few states that even have this as an optional service. Why would we be under legal constraints? Not that I'm into support and eliminating it, but why would we be having this if no other state even has ADHC for an optional Medi-Cal benefit?
Elio.
It is our understanding that about 8 states have this as a state plan optional benefit, and that other states may have like services, whether they be adult day health care or adult daycare, in other forms, such as under a waiver or as part of other programs.
So this benefit is not what you're saying is, would we be, and I'm not using this, I'm just trying to understand now, how would we be in comparison to most states in terms of adult day health care services?
I'm having difficult to try to quantify that and give you a good answer in that they vary. Like a lot of home and community-based services or programs are not necessarily apples-to-apples comparison. As I mentioned, my understanding is that the adult day health care benefit as a state plan option, about 8 states have that. I know that there have been questions from the federal government regarding the structure of some of these services, and so some states have contemplated or tried to transition to a waiver of some sort to maintain the benefit. As far as across the country, I'm not entirely sure how we would necessarily compare, given an elimination of the benefit as well.
Just in terms of more broadly on the question, California does rank fairly high compared to other states in the percentage of our long-term care spending that is on home and community-based services compared to nursing homes. So from that aspect, we do compare favorably to other states. And to get back to some of the previous discussions on IHSS, obviously that's the direction the governor's budget would move us towards, is relying more heavily on in-home supportive
Right.
services. And it's about 80 to 90% of ADHC beneficiaries who also receive IHSS services.
80 to 90%?
Yeah.
Was that a question about whether it was 80 or 90%?
80 to 90% are also
80
receiving...
to 90, in that kind of range. I don't have a
are also receiving IHHS services, who are receiving also adult day health care. That's what.
Right. Okay.
And so the idea is to these people would be, or those individuals receiving it would also be receiving adult day health care and are eligible for other Medi-Cal services, health care, but they will lose the socialization component is really what we're saying.
Yes, they would continue to be eligible for the health services that are provided through the ADHC, through the Medi-Cal fee-for-service system.
Right.
It's the particularly those kind of social aspects that would be lost.
And do we have any idea what might replace that?
Well,
I mean, the Senate version has transition, and I would imagine it would be talking about transition to something. I'm just wondering if there are other resources that we have identified.
So the governor's proposal would eliminate the benefit and does not propose
any transition. Right.
Okay. Ms. Skinner.
Thank you. I just kind of want to highlight a few things that were pointed out. It is not surprising that a large percent of IHHS recipients would also be in adult day health care because in-home health the IHS is not a medical. It's more, as is pointed out in our documents, home services like bathing, feeding, things like that. The adult day health care is, and I happen to have an elderly neighbor who is a recipient of both programs, who is a serious diabetic and has emphysema. And there's certain limitations on him from the emphysema due to his physical abilities, and then for the diabetes, there are the medical needs. So, that's just one. Obviously, that's not one example like that is obviously not illustrative for the whole variety of different people who utilize these services. But so I want to point that out. And then the second thing is it's important to note the comment the Department of Finance made that compared to other states, we have a lower number of people in nursing homes. So that is a good thing, because if we had, compared to other states, a higher number of people in nursing homes, then the debate we would be having right now is how can we reduce the cost of our nursing home care, because, of course, our nursing home care costs more than either IAHS or adult day health care. So a lot of the reason that the state moved towards those two programs was, and I don't know what year because I wasn't in the legislature, but was because nursing home costs and number of people in nursing homes were going up. And so we're now in a situation where, yes, we have a serious budget deficit. But, again, I know this is not really a gimmick, but it's that situation of if we make this cut and we score it in this year and our costs come up next year, what good have we done ourselves? So I think, and the other issue that's thrown out a lot is this notion that we're the only state that has it, and we're not. There's 8 other states. But even if we were the only state who had adult day health care, we should be proud of that, because we're also the state that has a lower percent of people in nursing homes. So I think that it would not be wise for us, from a fiscal point of view, to eliminate adult day health care. though I do appreciate why the governor, we've got to find some cuts. So I would not support the action of the elimination of adult day health care, and I think we should probably leave it open, because we also have learned today that while we can't guarantee it, the possibility of the elimination can also throw us into court on the what's the ADA. And so then again, we wouldn't also score savings. So perhaps a little more work, and I know that our timeline is short, as to what other possibilities we may to achieve some savings here without the elimination. And we already have, by virtue of the Medi-Cal cuts that are also in the governor's proposal, there are some cuts to this program already. I mean, it's kind of a double hit. But anyway, I think that we should try to look at whether there's what kind of alternatives we can put on the table.
Ms. Harkey, followed by Mr. Nielsen.
I would kind of like to echo the sentiments of Assemblymember Skinner. I know we're looking for savings, and I'm going to suggest that maybe we look at, it's what, 20 million or 25 million? We're looking for savings that maybe we could achieve by increasing co-payments in some other area. This is something that saves us money over the long term. It also allows families to work during the day. It has a lot of benefits that, we, and I know we're cutting and reducing spending, and I'm all for that, but I think we can find savings for some that are perhaps less, that we get a less ROI on, so to speak. We get a lot back from our investment here, and I know the governor is dealing with untenable circumstances trying to find savings, but I would like to see us look for increasing co-payments in some other areas that might come up with 20, 25 million. Thank you.
Okay, and certainly, before we go to Mr. Nielsen, I'd point out we approved the governor's co-pay increases, and we've also approved the rate cuts as part of our plan, so that we've done some of the things that you're talking about. But I certainly appreciate your point that we need to look elsewhere. I just would also say we need to look elsewhere, and at this point, maybe we should look on both sides of the equation and look at some revenues too as a possibility. Mr. Nielsen is next, but I know that's
We've talked a little bit about it here. It's a huge area, I think, of possible future savings. We always do things in the budget and are enjoined by legal action. So I talk all the time about litigation prevention, proofing, how you craft the language, how you draft your ideas. We've talked around it here about, I think, at least over 3 budget cycles, different changes that have been proposed that we did not prevail in court. My point would be, is it a fruitful area for inquiry to ask some of our fine attorneys to do a quick review of case law? What were the telling points in these various cases we lost, and then could we craft language and revisit some of those changes that we lost on before but now have a greater likelihood of prevailing in court? I mean, I've kind of focused on this transition and other options. Could we come up with other options or an array of options in transition that would make it more difficult for a party to prevail? Is that an area of some fruitful inquiry?
I mean, our sense, and part of the reason we ended up with this piece in the governor's budget, was that we had tried the various approaches at scaling back the services multiple ways and haven't been successful, yet the courts have been allowing states to eliminate full scale the benefits. So it's maybe this would be a different discussion if the courts were have been having shown more flexibility in terms of the state's budget situation and making trade-offs, but they haven't been, and so you sort of end up in this down this road where it's an optional benefit, it's the state's choice, and we're, in essence, I would argue, we're choosing preserving medical services over these services, and those are the tough choices we're left with at this point. I mean, we're happy to continue to talk about the various options, but I think the answer in terms of, well, could we try this, could we try that, we haven't had very much luck, and you know, we're down to sort of the wholesale elimination as the cleanest option that the courts have seemed to give us the go-ahead on.
Mr. Leno.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As we have this conversation, which I'm finding very interesting, I think we should remember the governor's very clear message to us today that if we don't get to a June ballot, we're looking at a second round of $12 billion in cuts, which will make today's conversation appear to make today's weather look like a sunny day in July if we don't have that money in June. I wanted to ask, we're imposing copays all across the board. Is there a possibility there could be a copay for participants in adult day health care? We're looking for some money to raise here.
Yeah, no, the copay proposal the governor put forward and that's been adopted by both houses would not affect adult day health care, but that's something we could look at as what could that mean for program participation if we had a mandatory copay.
LAO, would this trigger any legal concerns in your mind?
Off the top of my head, I'm not entirely sure. Again, we could also look into this issue as a potential option.
That'd be great. And then also, and this might be a little trickier, because I know it would also include some federal consideration and potential waiver, we also impose provider fees elsewhere. Might we be able to do so here to attract some federal dollars?
Again, I don't know if that is a possibility. We can certainly look into it.
Great.
Yeah. We'll definitely inquire about that. One thing that's unique about ADHC, though, compared to some of the other, like hospitals or nursing homes where we've done fees, is ADHC is almost exclusively Medi-Cal. Almost everybody who receives these services on Medi-Cal, very little private pay. So that's a consideration because they generally require winners and losers throughout an industry for provider fees.
At this point, shots in the dark, just looking for something to help us through this.
We're keeping this item open so we can ask for those questions to be answered tomorrow or the next time we reconvene. Mr. Huff, followed by Ms. Harkey.
I actually wanted to echo a little bit of what my colleague Senator Leno said, that you know, we've been wrestling with this for a long time. Nobody wants to make these tough cuts. But in the Assembly, you have no cushion. You're already down to the nubs. You don't have that $1 billion surplus. And somewhere along the line, we just got to make some difficult decisions. And we can nip and tuck around here, but we're open to the idea of copay and saying, I think it's a good idea. Although from what I understand, it often falls back on the providers because they can't compel them to pay, and so the providers end up having to suck it up. But it may be something to look at to try to salvage this, but we actually have a lot of heavy lifting still to do. So, thank you.
Ms. Harkey.
I will go back to a little bit about what I was discussing earlier today with the governor. I think we have to look at an overall approach here. And for the last 2 years, we've been looking at line by line and category, and we're running out of categories and we're running out of places to grab. And I understand that that's the normal budget process, but we are not in a normal budget time, and we won't be for quite a few years. If we think that what we do today is going to last forever, it really won't. So I go back to one of my suggestions that I know has been scored, that people have looked at, that both sides of the aisle and staff have looked at, was to reduce across the board, 20% or even 10% would yield half the savings to state departments. I have had operating or contracting units come in and tell me that they could live with this. They know where to find savings in their departments. This does not attack staff or any of the contract employees. It merely limits the budget. And if 20% yields 1.2, I think we could estimate that 10% would yield half of that. And so we have to start looking at these types of things. I'm not sure whatever happened. I've also got a recommendation to eliminate some departments that are maybe underused, and I've got like $20 billion there. I know automating court reporting, there was a savings of 113, and I'm not sure that we did that. There's areas here at the state that we can reduce. We've also had today downstairs, we had a meeting at 10 a.m. On the Wildlife Conservation Board where they are thinking of borrowing to buy for habitat acquisition. Now, while borrowing would require bond funds, of which we have scarce, you know that takes interest payments. So we're increasing our interest, which is cutting into our general fund. So I think that all of these areas kind of need to be looked at in a reform. And I know we're just looking for $20 million here, but we're going to be looking for a long time, which is why I would love to work with you all on a long-term kind of workout, even though we have to fill this hole, and then let's start looking at other options so that we don't get down to this again in 6 months, which we will. Thank you.
Well, certainly, and as part of as we go through the rest of the agenda, there are each of the state agencies is up, and I encourage you to propose, additional cuts in those agencies if you see areas where we can do that. There's some unallocated cuts to the various agencies along the lines that you're speaking of. Some of which we're moving forward on, some of which present problems like the governor raised in terms of what does that mean in terms of the direct service? Does that mean we end up releasing prisoners in one case, or does that mean we end up, not being able to register all of our cars, or what are the actual impacts? But you certainly will find a willing, allies in terms of looking for the waste, the fraud, or trying to trim the agencies as much as we possibly can. I mean, I don't think that there is that much fat left on the bone, in terms of a state where we've got our lowest, in terms of state employees per capita, we're one of the lowest in the nation as a state. Doesn't mean there's certainly areas that we can cut, and I want to work with you on that both in this budget process, and then once we even get through this budget process, trying to get to the next phase of how do we really make our agencies perform better. And on that note, I want to put a plug in for Sub 6, which is something we recently created this year to really get at that issue. So I'm really looking forward to working with you on this. Sub 6 is basically a subcommittee on the Assembly that's dedicated to looking at sort of performance-based budgeting issues, and we're going to go to each of the agencies and ask them not just what is their budgets, but what are their deliverables, and we're going to get that up front, and then we're going to ask it periodically throughout the year, how are they achieving those deliverables? And the membership of that committee is all folks who are involved in the leadership in terms of finance issues. We have all of the chairs of the subcommittees comprise the Democratic side of the membership, and many of the vice chairs are on the Republican side of the membership. And that's an area and a place where I'm really hoping we can make progress on the issue that you're talking about. With that, is there any other comments on the long-term care issue? If not, I think we've finished out the major conference issues first pass. We still have a long ways to go. We have to do the second book of all the other issues, but I think we can. This is a good stopping point for today. We can now go meet and brief for the issues for tomorrow. So unless someone has a closing comment, I'm going to close this conference down for the day. Oh, thank you for the reminder. And tomorrow we're going to begin with, before we get into the issues, a little bit more discussion on redevelopment. We had asked LEO and Finance to come back with us with a little bit more information, and we're hoping to look, get their opinions. We'd ask them for your opinions on the mayors, the Big Ten cities proposal, and what other proposals may be out there. So we want to spend a little bit of time fleshing that out a little bit more. There's been a lot of interest in that, and then we'll move into the book. So that's the plan for tomorrow, and we meet at, what time do we meet tomorrow? 10 a.m. So we'll see you all back here at 10 a.m. Thank you.